Silence has a specific weight to it, especially when you have lived inside it for 72 years. Sometimes it is as light as a feather floating on a summer breeze, the kind of comfortable quiet that filled the room when my husband Arthur and I would read side by side on Sunday mornings. But on that particular Christmas morning, the silence in the house was heavy. It pressed down on my chest like a wet wool blanket, suffocating and cold. I woke up at 5 a.m, not because of an alarm, but because my body has been programmed by decades of motherhood and grandmotherhood to rise before the sun. On Christmas, usually the air would be vibrating with anticipation. I would be mentally reviewing my checklist, thinking about the turkey that needed basting the cranberry sauce I made from scratch, and the look on my grandchildren's faces when they saw the mountain of gifts under the tree. But today the air was stagnant. It felt dead. I sat up in bed and the aches in my joints greeted me like old, unwanted friends. I reached for my glasses on the nightstand and my hand brushed against the cold mahogany surface. The house was too still. Even the furnace seemed to be holding its breath. I pulled on my robe, the chenille fabric worn thin at the elbows, and shuffled into the hallway. Usually by this hour, I would hear the soft thud of little feet or the murmur of the television playing cartoons. My son David was an early riser, and his wife Sarah usually needed her coffee before she could function, so the smell of brewing roast should have been drifting up the stairs. There was nothing. No smell of coffee. No sound of life. Just the pale gray light of a Chicago winter filtering through the blinds, casting long prison bar shadows on the floor. I walked down the hallway and pushed open the door to the guest room, where my 2 grandsons slept. The beds were made perfectly military tight. The pillows were uncreased. The chaos of toys and clothes that usually exploded from their suitcases was absent. My heart gave a strange lurch, a flutter of panic that I quickly tamped down with rationality. Perhaps they had gone out for a drive to look at the neighborhood lights before the sun came up fully. Perhaps they had run to the 24-hour grocery store for milk. I clung to these flimsy explanations as I descended the stairs, gripping the banister tightly. When I reached the kitchen, the cleanliness of it struck me as almost violent. The counters gleamed under the under-cabinet lighting. There were no mixing bowls, no flour dusted on the granite, no chaotic preparations for the feast I was expected to cook. It looked like a showroom kitchen, sterile and impersonal. I walked to the coffee maker and placed my hand on the carafe. It was stone cold. I turned to look out the window at the driveway. The heavy snowfall from the night before remained pristine and unbroken, except for the tire tracks leading away from the garage. Both spaces were empty. David's luxury sedan and Sarah's massive SUV were gone. Panic began to rise in my throat, sour and sharp, but then I saw it. A single piece of cream-colored stationery folded neatly and placed in the center of the kitchen island, anchored by a crystal salt shaker. I walked toward it, my slippers making a shushing sound on the hardwood floor. I recognized the stationery. I had bought that set for Sarah 3 years ago, a stocking stuffer she had looked at with polite indifference. Now it served a purpose. My hands did not shake as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was loopy and decorative, the kind of penmanship that tries too hard to look elegant. Eleanor, we decided to take the boys to the Maldives for the holidays. It was a last-minute opportunity we could not pass up. We knew you would not be up for the long flight or the heat, so we thought it best to let you enjoy a quiet Christmas at home. We will be back after New Year. There's a frozen lasagna in the freezer if you need it. Sarah. I read the note once. Then I read it again. I did not scream. I did not collapse onto the floor in a heap of sobbing grief. Instead, a strange and icy calm settled over me. It started in my stomach and spread outward to my fingertips, cooling the heat of my confusion until I felt absolute clarity. A frozen lasagna. They had gone to the Maldives, a trip that cost thousands of dollars on a whim, and left me a frozen lasagna. They had not asked me. They had not invited me. They had simply discarded me like an old piece of furniture that clashed with the tropical aesthetic of their vacation. I set the note down and walked to the coffee maker. I went through the motions of grinding the beans, pouring the water, and pressing the button. The rhythmic gurgling of the machine was the only sound in the cavernous house. I stood there watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, and for the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to really look at my life. I mean, really look at it without the soft focus filter of maternal love and excuse-making. It had begun shortly after Arthur died. We had been married for 50 years, and when his heart stopped, so did a large part of my world. I was drifting through my days in our old bungalow surrounded by memories that hurt too much to touch. David had come to me then. He was the dutiful son, concerned and attentive. He told me that he and Sarah were worried about me being alone. He told me that their house was too small for their growing boys, and that if we pooled our resources, we could buy a large, beautiful home in the suburbs where we could all live together. A multi-generational home, he called it. He painted a picture of family dinners of me reading stories to the boys of never being lonely again. I was vulnerable. I was grieving, and I was terrified of the silence. So I sold the bungalow. I took the insurance money from Arthur's policy. I handed it all over for the down payment on this sprawling 5-bedroom house in an upscale gated community. I remembered sitting at the closing table, the lawyer sliding papers across the polished wood. David had said it would be better if the deed was in his and Sarah's name to simplify the estate planning later. He said it was to protect me from taxes. I believed him. I signed the checks. I signed the papers. I moved into the downstairs suite, and for a few months it was exactly as he promised. But the erosion was slow and subtle, like water wearing down a stone. First it was the groceries. Eleanor, since you are home during the day, could you handle the shopping? Then it was the cooking. Sarah is so tired from work, it would be a huge help if you started dinner. Then it was the bills. David mentioned that the heating costs for such a big house were astronomical. I offered to pay the utilities, then the internet, then the landscaping fees. Before I knew it, I was paying for the privilege of being their live-in housekeeper and nanny. I looked around the kitchen, the stainless steel refrigerator with the smart screen built into the door. I paid $3,000 for that because Sarah said the old one was not energy efficient. The double oven range. I paid for that too because David wanted to host dinner parties. The espresso machine, the commercial grade blender, the custom cabinets. I walked into the living room, the 75-inch television mounted above the fireplace. My Christmas gift to them last year, the Italian leather sectional sofa that wrapped around the room. I remembered writing the check for that sofa standing in the showroom, while Sarah debated between charcoal and slate gray. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my coffee cup. I sat at the island, the same island I had paid to have installed, because Sarah wanted quartz instead of granite. I sipped the hot coffee and stared at the note again. You would not be up for the long flight. It was not a consideration of my health. It was a dismissal. They did not want me there. I was the wallet. I was the ATM. And when the ATM was not needed, I was expected to stay in the corner and wait until I was useful again. I remembered a conversation I had overheard 2 months ago. I was in the hallway folding laundry when I heard Sarah on the phone in her bedroom. She was laughing. She said, "Oh, we cannot get rid of her yet. She pays for literally everything. The house would fall apart without her checkbook. Besides, free childcare is hard to find." I had frozen, clutching a towel to my chest. I had convinced myself I misunderstood. I told myself she was joking, that it was just a vent session. But looking at this note, this cruel dismissal on Christmas morning, I knew I had not misunderstood anything. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup and placed it in the dishwasher. Then I walked to my bedroom. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of Arthur. He was looking at the camera with that bemused expression he always had when I was about to do something stubborn. I picked up the frame and traced the line of his jaw with my thumb. Arthur would have burned this house to the ground, figuratively speaking, before letting anyone treat me this way. He hated bullies, and he hated ungratefulness. "I am done, Arthur," I whispered to the silent room. "I am absolutely done." I went to my closet and pulled down the blue accordion file box from the top shelf. Arthur was a meticulous record keeper, and he had taught me well. Every time I bought something big, every time I paid a contractor, every time I purchased an appliance, I kept the receipt. I stapled the warranty to the receipt and filed it away. David used to tease me about my hoarding of paper. He called it old-fashioned. Today it was going to be my weapon. I opened the box and flipped through the tabs. Furniture, electronics, appliances, outdoor. The stack of paper was thick. I sat on the edge of my bed and started making a list. My handwriting was steady. Item by item, I cataloged everything I had purchased. The list grew longer and longer. The television, the sound system, the rugs, the lamps, the washing machine and dryer, the patio furniture, the grill, even the expensive mattresses in the boys' rooms. It was 8:00 a.m. I picked up my phone. I searched for moving companies that offered emergency holiday services. It was a long shot. Most people were opening gifts or sleeping in. But I found a listing for a company called Ironclad Movers. Their website said 24/7 service, no job too big or too small. I dialed the number. A man answered on the second ring. His voice was gruff but alert. "Ironclad Movers. This is Frank. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Frank." I said, my voice clear and authoritative. "I have an emergency move. I need a full crew and a large truck immediately. I am willing to pay triple your holiday rate." There was a pause on the line. "Triple?" "Ma'am, it is Christmas morning. My guys are with their families." "I understand that," I said. "I am prepared to pay $5,000 cash on top of the hourly rate if you can be here in 2 hours. And I have fresh coffee and pastries." I heard him cover the phone and shout something to someone in the background. He came back on the line. "Where are you located?" I gave him the address. "We will be there by 10 a.m. I hung up the phone and felt a surge of adrenaline. I did not have a new place to go yet, but I knew I could not stay here. I grabbed my laptop and started searching. There was a luxury senior living community called the Willow Creek Residence about 10 miles away. I had driven past it many times, admiring the landscaping and the peaceful atmosphere. I knew they had furnished guest suites for prospective residents. I called the emergency leasing number. A woman named Clara answered. She was surprisingly cheerful for someone working on a holiday. I explained my situation briefly, omitting the drama and focusing on the urgency. I told her I wanted to rent a 2-bedroom unit immediately and would pay 6 months in advance. Money talks even on Christmas. She told me to come over whenever I was ready. At 10 a.m. sharp, a massive moving truck rumbled up the driveway. The air brakes hissed, breaking the suburban silence. 3 men jumped out. They were big, burly men in thick coats, breathing steam into the cold air. Frank, the owner, was older with a gray beard and kind eyes. I met them at the door with a tray of coffee and a box of gourmet donuts I had hidden in the pantry. "Ma'am, you are serious," Frank said, looking at the truck and then at me. "I am always serious, Frank," I said, handing him a coffee. "Please come in. We have a lot of work to do." I walked them through the house, clutching my blue folder like a shield. I pointed out every item on my list. The living room was first. "Take the sofa," I said. "Take the rug. Take the television. Take the coffee table." One of the younger movers, a boy named Tyler, looked around nervously. "Ma'am, are you sure? Does your family know about this?" I turned to him and opened my blue folder. I pulled out the receipt for the sofa. "See this date, Tyler? See this signature? That is Eleanor Vance. That is me. I bought it. I own it. And I am taking it." Frank looked at the receipt, then looked at Tyler. "You heard the lady. If she has the paper, it goes on the truck. Move it." They worked with efficient brutality. The sectional was disassembled and carried out in pieces. The television was unmounted, leaving gaping holes in the drywall. I did not care about the holes. David could fix them. He was handy enough when he wasn't pretending to be helpless. The living room transformed from a magazine spread into a hollow, echoing box. The dust bunnies that had been hiding under the furniture were suddenly exposed, dancing in the pale winter light. We moved to the kitchen. The refrigerator was a beast to move, but Frank and his men handled it. They emptied the contents onto the counters. Jars of pickles, bottles of wine, artisanal mustards, and the frozen lasagna, all left stranded on the quartz island. When they wheeled the fridge out, it left a dark, rectangular void against the wall. It looked like a missing tooth. We went upstairs. I had them strip the guest room. The mattresses, the bed frames, the dressers. All mine. All paid for. I went into the master bedroom. I took the Dyson vacuum cleaner. I took the high-end air purifier. I took the curtains I had custom ordered. By 1 p.m., the house was a skeleton. It echoed. My footsteps sounded loud and sharp as I walked through the rooms one last time. It was shocking how much of the home had been provided by me. Without my contributions, it was just walls and floors. It was cold and impersonal. I went to the kitchen island where the pile of rejected food sat. I picked up the note Sarah had written. I took a red pen from my purse and uncapped it. Underneath her perfectly slanted signature, I wrote, "Dear David and Sarah, I hope you enjoyed the Maldives. I decided to take your advice and have a quiet Christmas. I have moved to my new home. Since you believe in the importance of space, I have cleared mine out of your house. Enclosed are the bills for the heat, the water, and the electricity, which are now back in your name. Good luck with the mortgage. Love, Mom." I placed the note back under the salt shaker. Next to it, I placed my house keys. Then I added the stack of unpaid bills that had arrived yesterday. I looked at the pile of food. The frozen lasagna was starting to sweat beads of condensation. I left it there. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I climbed into my car and followed the moving truck down the driveway. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I was afraid if I looked back, I might turn into a pillar of salt, or worse, a woman who forgives too easily. The Willow Creek residence was beautiful. It was decorated for the holidays with tasteful white lights and wreaths. Clara met me at the front desk. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair cut in a chic bob and reading glasses on a chain. "Mrs. Vance, you made it," she said warmly. "And you brought a caravan. I brought my life, Clara," I said. The apartment was on the 3rd floor overlooking a frozen pond and a cluster of pine trees. It was spacious with high ceilings and large windows. The movers brought everything up. It was chaotic for a few hours, but by evening my furniture was arranged. My television was on the wall. My clothes were in the closet. It was smaller than the house, but it felt infinitely bigger because there was no tension in the air. There was no walking on eggshells. I tipped the movers generously, handing Frank the extra cash I had promised. He shook my hand firmly. "You're a tough lady, Mrs. Vance. I respect that." "Thank you, Frank. Merry Christmas." That night, I sat on my sofa, wrapped in my favorite blanket, eating a sandwich I had made from provisions I bought at a gas station. It was the best Christmas dinner I had eaten in years. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I felt a sense of peace that was so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I slept soundly for the first time since Arthur died. The peace lasted for exactly 5 days. I knew when they returned because my phone, which I had kept on silent, lit up like a slot machine. It started at 2 p.m. David, David, Sarah, David, Sarah, David. Then the text messages. "Mom, where are you? Mom, pick up. Mom, is this a joke? Mom, we are calling the police." I sat on my balcony sipping tea and watching the notifications roll in. I did not answer. I wanted them to sit in it. I wanted them to feel the full weight of the emptiness they had created. I had kept my access to the home security system. I opened the app on my tablet. The camera feed loaded, showing the living room. It was pathetic and satisfying. David was pacing back and forth, his hands in his hair. Sarah was sitting on the floor because there was nowhere else to sit, crying hysterically. The boys were running around, confused, asking where the TV was. I watched as the police arrived. 2 officers walked in looking bewildered. David was gesturing wildly, pointing at the empty spaces on the walls. Sarah was screaming about robbery. I turned up the volume on my tablet. "Everything is gone, officer," Sarah shrieked. "Our furniture, our appliances, even the beds. Someone cleared us out." The officer was taking notes. "And there was no sign of forced entry?" "No," David yelled. "We came home and the keys were on the counter." I watched for a while longer. I watched the realization slowly dawn on David's face when he finally found the note on the kitchen island. I saw him read it. I saw the color drain from his face. He showed it to Sarah. She stopped crying and went deadly silent. Then she started screaming again, but this time her anger was directed at the note, not the imaginary robbers. I closed the app. I poured myself another cup of tea. The knock on my door came 2 days later. I expected it. David and Sarah were not the type to let go of assets easily. I opened the door to find 2 police officers, different ones from the video, standing in the hallway. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" the taller officer asked. "Yes, officer. How can I help you?" "Ma'am, we are following up on a report filed by your son, David Vance. He claims you committed grand larceny by removing property from his residence." I smiled. It was a polite, grandmotherly smile. "Please come in, officers. It is cold in the hallway." They stepped inside and looked around. They saw the leather sofa. They saw the television. They saw the rug. "I assume you are here about the furniture," I said, gesturing to the room. "Yes, ma'am," the officer said, looking uncomfortable. "Your son says this belongs to him." I walked to my desk and picked up the blue accordion folder. I handed it to the officer. "Everything in this apartment was purchased by me," I said calmly. "Every single item. You will find the original receipts, the credit card statements, and the delivery confirmations in that folder, all in my name, all paid from my accounts." The officer opened the folder. He flipped through the pages. He looked at the receipt for the sofa. He checked the serial number on the back of the TV against the warranty card in the file. He spent 10 minutes going through the documents while his partner stood by the door shifting his weight. Finally, the officer closed the folder. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "This is very thorough, Mrs. Vance. My husband taught me to keep good records," I said. "I lived in that house for 3 years. I paid for the furniture. I paid the bills. When I moved out, I took my property. That is not theft, officer. That is moving." The officer nodded. "You are absolutely right, ma'am. This is a civil matter at best, but criminally, you are in the clear. The property belongs to you." "Thank you, officer. Would you like a cookie for the road?" They left, and I knew that was the end of the criminal threat. But David and Sarah were desperate. Without my financial support, the house was a sinking ship. A week later, I was served with a lawsuit. Small claims court. They were suing me for the maximum amount allowed plus damages for emotional distress. They claimed that even if I bought the items, they were gifts to the household and therefore joint property. The court date was set for February. The winter was harsh that year, deep snowdrifts and biting winds, but I felt warm. I had made friends at Willow Creek. Clara and I had started a book club. I met a gentleman named Robert down the hall who played chess. I was busy. I was happy. On the day of the hearing, I dressed in my best navy blue suit. I wore the pearls Arthur had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked like a woman of substance. I arrived at the courthouse early. David and Sarah arrived 10 minutes later. They looked tired. Sarah's tan had faded, leaving her looking sallow and pinched. David wouldn't meet my eyes. When our case was called, we stood before the judge. She was a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "State your case," she said to David. David cleared his throat. Your Honor, my mother moved out without notice and stripped our home of essential items. She took the beds, the appliances, everything. We have 2 children. It caused immense hardship. We believe these items were gifts to the family, and she had no right to repossess them. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Vance? Your Honor. I said, my voice steady. I moved into my son's home after my husband died. I was promised a family environment. Instead, I became a bank and a housekeeper. I purchased every item in question with my own funds. They were not gifts. They were items I bought for my own use and the use of the household while I lived there. When I was treated with disrespect and abandoned on Christmas, I decided to leave and take my property with me. I handed the bailiff my blue folder. The judge took it and began to read. The silence in the courtroom was thick. I could hear the clock ticking. I could hear Sarah tapping her foot nervously against the floor. The judge read for a long time. She looked at the receipts. She looked at the total amounts. Then she looked up at David and Sarah. Mr. Vance, according to these records, your mother paid for the refrigerator, the stove, the washing machine, the dryer, the living room furniture, and the beds. Is this correct? Yes, but... David started. Did you pay her back for any of these items? Did you have a written agreement that these were gifts? No, Your Honor, but it was implied. Implied? The judge raised an eyebrow. The law does not deal in implications, Mr. Vance. It deals in evidence. Your mother has proof of ownership. You have assumptions. She turned a page. And I see here she was also paying the utility bills? Sarah spoke up. She offered to pay those. The judge took off her glasses. Let me get this straight. You go on a luxury vacation to the Maldives, leaving your mother alone on Christmas. And when you come back, you sue her because she took her own refrigerator. Sarah's face turned a blotchy red. It is not about the refrigerator. It is about the principle. The principle, indeed, the judge said dryly. The principle here is that you cannot sue someone for taking back their own property, especially when you have clearly been exploiting their generosity. She slammed her gavel. Case dismissed. The plaintiff will pay all court costs. And Mrs. Vance? Yes, Your Honor. Enjoy your new apartment. Thank you, Your Honor. I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high. David and Sarah stood there stunned. As I passed them, David reached out and touched my arm. Mom, wait, he said, his voice cracking. We can fix this. We are sorry. The boys miss you. I stopped. I looked at my son. I saw the panic in his eyes. It wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of the mortgage payments. Fear of the credit card bills. Fear of having to live within his means. I removed his hand from my arm gently but firmly. I miss the boys too, David, I said. And when you are ready to let me see them without asking for a check, we can talk. But until then, I suggest you sell that big house. It is too expensive for you. I walked away. I walked out of the courthouse and into the crisp winter air. The sun was shining, reflecting off the snow, creating a blinding white light. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, clean air. I hailed a taxi. To Willow Creek, please, I told the driver. As we drove away, I thought about silence again. For so long, silence had been my enemy. It had been a reminder of what I had lost. But now, sitting in the back of that taxi, watching the city fly by, I realized that silence wasn't empty. It was a blank canvas. It was space. Space for me to paint a new life. Space for me to decide who I wanted to be. I was Eleanor Vance. I was 72 years old. And for the first time in a very long time, I was free. That evening at Willow Creek, there was a potluck dinner in the community room. Clara invited me to sit at her table. Robert was there, too. We ate lasagna, freshly made hot and delicious, and we laughed. We told stories about our pasts. We talked about books. We talked about art. At one point, Clara leaned over and patted my hand. We are glad you are here, Eleanor. You add a lot of life to this place. I looked around the room at the faces of these strangers who were becoming friends. I thought about Arthur and how he would have loved the chess games with Robert. I thought about David and Sarah, and I hoped that one day they would learn the lesson I had to learn the hard way. The lesson is simple, really. You teach people how to treat you. If you make yourself a doormat, people will wipe their feet on you. If you make yourself an ATM, people will only come to you when they need cash. But if you stand up, if you draw a line in the sand, if you value yourself enough to walk away from those who do not value you, that is when you find your real worth. I went back to my apartment that night and stood on the balcony. The stars were bright in the winter sky. I held my cup of tea and toasted the moon. "Here is to the rest of my life," I whispered. And the silence of the night did not press down on me. It lifted me up. It held me. And it was beautiful.